The morning sun had scarcely pierced the fog-laden streets of London when Lady Isabella Morton awoke in her silken canopied bed, the faint scent of roses lingering from the previous evening's lavish ceremony. Her heart still fluttered with the remnants of the night before. Whispers of music, the sparkle of crystal chandeliers, the distant laughter of a city that seemed almost unreal in its grandeur. She dressed with meticulous care, her slender fingers smoothing the folds of her ivory gown, embroidered delicately with silver thread that caught the early light. Today should have been her triumph, the start of a life entwined with the Duke of Ashbourne, a man whose reputation for pride and elegance had preceded him across the drawing rooms of England. Yet, an unease clung to her like a shadow, one she could not shake even amid the intoxicating scent of polished mahogany and perfumed candles. The Duke himself, tall and impeccably poised, entered the room with the measured grace of a man accustomed to the scrutiny of the elite. His dark eyes, framed by the slightest furrow of his brow, betrayed a tension he rarely allowed the world to see. Isabella regarded him with a mixture of hope and trepidation. She had admired him from afar, even as whispers of his temper and the rigid expectations of his family had reached her ears. Now, married though she was, the reality of their union felt as fragile as the lace that adorned her gown. A soft knock at the door announced the presence of the Duke's mother, the formidable Duchess of Ashbourne, her eyes sharp and unyielding, scanning Isabella with the precision of a hawk. Behind her, other members of the household had gathered, their expressions a careful mixture of curiosity and concealed disdain. "My dear Isabella," the Duchess began, her tone smooth but icy, "one hopes that matrimony has taught you the importance of comportment and awareness. Surely, one does not wish to bring unnecessary attention to oneself, particularly in the first hours of one's new position within a house of such prominence." Her words, though outwardly polite, dripped with the insinuation of impropriety, and the assembled family's polite nods seemed more like silent claws ready to strike. Isabella's pulse quickened, but she held her chin high, her voice steady. "I assure you, Your Grace, my intentions are entirely to honor the house and the Duke." The Duchess's lips pressed into a thin line, and the sharp glance she cast towards her son spoke volumes. Pride, Isabella realized, could be as cruel as any dagger. The room seemed to constrict around her, the gilded mirrors reflecting her nervous composure back at her 1,000-fold. A minor slip, a misaligned cuff, a faint blush at a comment, was enough to ignite a ripple of whispers that flowed through the gathered company like a cold wind. It was then that the Duke, standing at her side, cleared his throat, the sound firm yet hesitant. "Mother, I trust that Isabella will learn the ways of Ashbourne House in due course," he said, his eyes flickering towards her with the faintest glimmer of concern, though his tone carried the weight of restraint and social propriety. Isabella caught that fleeting glance and felt a flicker of reassurance. Yet it was small and fleeting, almost swallowed by the room's oppressive scrutiny. The Duchess, unwilling to relent, produced an object from her delicate gloved hand, a silver fan, etched with the crest of the Ashbourne estate. She brandished it as though to measure Isabella's very worth. "Perhaps a demonstration of your poise is necessary," she suggested with the kind of smile that concealed teeth sharp as knives. Gentle encouragement turned to public assessment. Isabella's every movement became subject to commentary. A misstep here, a faltering word there, and the whispers grew louder. The servants, trained to remain invisible, darted like shadows, adjusting tapestries and draping cloths, yet even their presence seemed complicit in magnifying the young bride's discomfort. Isabella's eyes swept the room, noting the subtle exchanges, the pursed lips, the raised brows. She realized, with a pang, that this was more than mere familial observation. It was a ritualized form of humiliation designed to assert control and remind her of her place. She had imagined marriage as a blending of hearts and estates, of shared laughter and quiet understanding. Instead, it had become a theater of judgment. Her hands, trembling slightly, tightened around the folds of her gown. She summoned every ounce of inner grace, bowing with the measured elegance that had been drilled into her since girlhood. Yet the audience of aristocrats received it as confirmation of her inadequacy, rather than as the dignified gesture it was meant to be. The Duke, torn between loyalty to his mother and his affection for Isabella, attempted to intervene subtly. A quiet word here, a gentle guiding of her hand there. But the family's eyes were unyielding, and their whispers sharpened, cutting through the room like polished steel. Isabella felt the sting of every insinuation, the weight of every judgmental glance. She wanted to cry, yet could not allow herself the vulnerability. In this room, tears would be weaponized, a sign of weakness to be recorded in memory and society gossip alike. Instead, she chose restraint, her composure both shield and silent protest, her posture a declaration that she would not be broken by words alone. A carriage waited outside, its polished wood gleaming in the morning light, prepared to convey her away from the suffocating confines of Ashbourne House. As she descended the staircase, her hand brushing against the delicate railing, she dropped a single rose from her gloved fingers. The flower fell to the marble floor, petals scattering like fragile hopes across the cold surface. It was a small, almost imperceptible act of defiance, yet it carried within it the weight of her resolve. She would endure, she would persevere, and she would not let this humiliation define her. Outside, the wheels of the carriage turned, the sound echoing down the cobblestone streets, and Isabella allowed herself a moment of silent mourning for what had been stolen from her in those first hours of marriage. As the carriage rolled away from the grand estate, the Duke's dark eyes followed her retreating figure, conflicted and heavy with unspoken emotion. He knew the severity of the blow dealt to her dignity, and yet the rigid expectations of his family bound his hands. His heart ached, an invisible chain of duty and desire constraining him. Isabella, though separated from the world of wealth and scrutiny, carried with her a quiet strength, a resilience that would only grow in the months and years to come. She had survived the morning's torment. Now, the story of her courage, her longing, and her eventual reckoning had only just begun. And for those who watched from a distance, a single question lingered in the air. Could love survive the rigid cruelty of society? And might the Duke yet learn the depth of what he had nearly lost? The carriage jolted gently over the cobblestones, carrying Isabella away from the suffocating grandeur of Ashbourne House and the piercing eyes of the Duke's family. Outside, the streets of London glistened with morning dew, the mist curling around gas lamps as if to shield her from the judgmental gaze of the city. She pressed her gloved hands to the cool window, tracing the fading outline of the estate, and felt a pang of sorrow so acute it stole her breath. Yet beneath the ache of humiliation there stirred something more enduring, a quiet resolve. She would not let the cruelty of others define her, nor allow their whispers to dictate the life she would forge beyond these gilded walls. By late afternoon, the carriage arrived at a modest countryside manor, nestled among rolling green hills and the gentle sweep of orchards. Here, removed from the scornful society of London, Isabella found a semblance of peace. The manor, though less ornate than her marital estate, was warm, welcoming, and unpretentious. Servants, trained to be attentive yet discreet, greeted her with polite curiosity rather than condescension, and she felt for the first time in days that her dignity could remain intact. Isabella wandered the gardens at twilight, inhaling the scent of lilacs and freshly turned earth, the world around her a balm to the wounds inflicted by prideful eyes and whispered judgments. Yet even in this tranquil exile, thoughts of the Duke of Ashbourne lingered, a persistent echo she could not ignore. She recalled his conflicted glance during the morning's humiliation, the subtle way his hand had brushed against hers, a quiet attempt to protect her, though ultimately insufficient. In that fleeting touch, she had glimpsed a man torn between the rigid expectations of family and the stirrings of his own heart. And though anger and hurt coiled within her like a viper, she also felt a strange warmth, a recognition that their story was far from concluded. Days blended into weeks, and weeks into months. Isabella's life became one of gentle routines and quiet purpose. She devoted herself to the care of local villagers, tending to the sick, assisting the elderly, and providing small comforts where the world had otherwise offered none. Her hands, delicate yet capable, stitched linens, prepared teas, and distributed medicines. Her presence brought solace, and the community, in turn, offered her quiet companionship. This work, though humble, restored her sense of agency. She began to understand that dignity was not merely a matter of societal approval, but of self-respect, earned through deeds and measured in quiet acts of courage and kindness. Meanwhile, back in London, the Duke found himself adrift amid the pomp and pretense of his own household. The Ashbourne estate remained as grand and immaculate as ever, yet a shadow had fallen over its gilded halls. Rumors had begun to circulate about the family's treatment of their new duchess, whispers that gnawed at his reputation and at his conscience alike. He felt the sting of every critical glance from his peers, every polite inquiry laced with subtext, and he knew that Isabella's absence was as conspicuous as it was unjust. Night after night, he lingered in his private study, quill in hand, struggling with letters he could not send, thoughts of her intruding upon every form of rationality and duty. Pride and propriety constrained him, yet desire and remorse burned just beneath the surface, a fire he could neither ignore nor fully confess. Despite the distance, small tokens of connection began to bridge the gap between them. A carefully folded note, slipped into the hands of a trusted courier, carried words of apology and longing. A single rose, its petals fresh and fragrant, arrived at her doorstep with no signature save the faintest seal of Ashbourne House. Isabella, though startled by these gestures, received them with measured grace. Each item was a reminder of the world she had left behind and the complicated heart of the man who had failed her in public but sought her in private. She kept the rose pressed between the pages of a journal, the note tucked beneath the folds of her embroidery, both tangible proofs that love, however complicated, persisted despite humiliation and separation. Yet Isabella's heart was not easily swayed. She had witnessed the cruelty of society firsthand and had learned that vulnerability could be weaponized. When the Duke's letters arrived, she read them carefully, weighing the sincerity of his words against the history of her suffering. She wrote replies with deliberate restraint, choosing civility over passion, composure over impulsive confession. Her responses were measured, polite, and occasionally tinged with the faintest trace of reproach, a reminder that forgiveness, like trust, must be earned, and that no act of contrition could erase the sting of public shame. In these months of correspondence, the Duke's words revealed a depth of emotion he had rarely displayed in public. He wrote of sleepless nights haunted by regret, of the agony of witnessing her dignity under siege, of the silent hope that she might, in time, allow him to prove the sincerity of his devotion. Isabella, reading these lines by the firelight in the quiet of her manor, felt a pang of longing, a softening in the armor she had carefully constructed around her heart. She recognized in his words the man she had glimpsed in London, the man capable of tenderness, of subtle courage, and of an affection that had been restrained not by lack of feeling, but by circumstance and family obligation. As winter's frost gave way to the gentle warmth of early spring, Isabella's reputation in the countryside blossomed quietly. Villagers spoke of her with reverence and fondness, recounting small tales of her generosity and wisdom. She attended local gatherings and charity events, her presence commanding respect not through title alone, but through the force of her character. Meanwhile, the Duke's intermittent visits, always discreet and shrouded in social propriety, became moments of delicate tension. Glances exchanged across the sunlit halls, brief words spoken in corridors lined with tulips and marble, the air between them thick with unspoken emotion. Each encounter, though brief, rekindled a spark neither could extinguish, a slow-burning fire of desire restrained by time, distance, and decorum. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the manor's gardens, Isabella received yet another letter. This one bore the seal of Ashbourne House, but contained no perfumed note or rose. Only a single, simple line. I have wronged you, and yet my heart cannot let you go. Will you allow me to show you the depth of my contrition? She held the parchment close, feeling the tremor of emotion it induced. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of reconciliation, of a love that could survive both societal scorn and personal pride. And yet, even in this moment of fragile hope, she knew the path forward would be fraught with challenges. Challenges of family, of social expectation, and of the fragile, delicate dance between vulnerability and dignity. As the night settled over the countryside manor, Isabella stood at her window, gazing at the stars reflected in the quiet pond below. Her thoughts were a tapestry of longing, resolve, and cautious anticipation. Somewhere in the heart of London, the Duke too must be wrestling with the enormity of his feelings, the weight of guilt and desire entwined inextricably. The stage was being set for a confrontation not of anger, but of hearts, one that would test courage, patience, and the endurance of love itself. And in the hush of that spring evening, it seemed possible that two souls, once torn apart by pride and cruelty, might find their way back to each other, guided by the subtle, persistent pull of fate. The air in London was thick with the scent of rain and horse-drawn carriages as Lady Isabella Morton arrived at the Grand Assembly, a ball that promised glittering gowns, whispered gossip, and the faint tremor of expectation beneath every polite conversation. Candlelight shimmered on polished oak floors, and crystal chandeliers fractured the light into 1,000 sparkling fragments, casting the guests in a dreamlike haze. Isabella, dressed in a gown of deep sapphire, the fabric hugging her slender frame with quiet elegance, moved through the room with the poise and confidence she had cultivated in her years of exile. Her eyes, dark and contemplative, scanned the ballroom, noting the subtle bows, the lifted fans, the careful arrangement of smiles that masked calculation and curiosity alike. Here, she was no longer merely the humiliated bride of 2 years past. She was a woman who had endured, grown, and carried herself with a dignity that even the most critical I could scarcely diminish. Among the throng, the Duke of Ashbourne lingered near the ornate hearth, his posture rigid, yet his gaze restless. He had been informed of her attendance, but no warning could steel him for the sight of her now, refined, radiant, and undeniably commanding. The first moment their eyes met, a charge of recognition and unspoken emotion passed between them, subtle yet electric. Isabella's lips curved in the faintest acknowledgement, a gesture at once polite and provocative, reminding him that while she bore the memory of humiliation, she also possessed the power to forgive, or to withhold entirely. The Duke's hand twitched at his side, as if craving the warmth of hers, yet restrained by the ever-present weight of societal expectation and personal pride. As the evening unfolded, Isabella navigated the ballroom with grace, engaging in measured conversation, her laughter a soft echo against the orchestral swell. Yet all the while, the Duke's presence haunted her periphery. When she paused to admire a painting, he was there, a silent shadow just beyond the candlelight. When she offered a polite comment to a fellow guest, his eyes found hers, seeking understanding, reconciliation, and perhaps a glimpse of forgiveness. The tension between them was delicate and taut, a thread pulled through layers of decorum, regret, and latent passion. Every glance, every slight smile, carried weight far beyond the surface, a silent language only the two of them understood. In a quiet moment, Isabella stepped into a dimly lit alcove, the room outside a blur of colors and movement. The Duke followed, his approach measured, deliberate, each step resonating with restraint. "Lady Isabella," he murmured, his voice low yet rich, carrying the undercurrent of emotions he had long sought to suppress. She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging him with the grace of a woman who had mastered both composure and subtle command. "Your Grace," she replied, her tone polite, yet edged with a controlled intensity that bespoke the years of solitude and reflection since their parting. The air between them shimmered with unspoken words, the weight of past humiliation and the fragile hope for reconciliation. He extended a gloved hand, a gesture both formal and intimate. "I have wronged you," he said quietly, his gaze unwavering, "more than I can express in words. And yet, seeing you now, I realize the depth of what I lost." Isabella's eyes softened, though she remained poised, her fingers brushing the fine lace of her gown. "It was not only your family who caused me anguish," she replied, her voice steady, carrying both reproach and curiosity, but the unspoken complicity of all who would stand idle while a woman's dignity was questioned. "And yet, you write to me, you seek me. Why should I trust that this is more than a fleeting sentiment?" The Duke bowed his head slightly, a shadow of vulnerability crossing his features. "Because my regret has no expiration. Because my admiration has never faltered. Because the world may judge, but my heart has always recognized your worth." His words hung between them, suspended in the dim candlelight, each syllable heavy with sincerity and restrained passion. Isabella studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the subtle trembling of a hand that had seldom betrayed feeling, the quiet fire behind his calm exterior. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the armor around her heart began to loosen, thread by delicate thread. A servant passed nearby, offering a tray of refreshments, and both Isabella and the Duke seized the mundane moment as a veil to their intimate conversation. He handed her a cup of tea, their fingers brushing, a fleeting contact that sent a shiver through both, charged with the memory of shared history and unspoken longing. Isabella accepted the cup, a small, deliberate gesture of trust, while the Duke's eyes lingered upon her face, drinking in the quiet dignity and subtle radiance that had matured during their years apart. Every heartbeat, every measured breath, spoke of the slow, careful dance they were beginning to perform, one of vulnerability, patience, and the tentative steps toward renewed intimacy. As the evening progressed, the orchestra swelled, and Isabella found herself swept into a dance. The Duke extended his hand, formal in appearance, yet infused with undeniable warmth. As she placed her gloved fingers in his, the room seemed to blur around them. The chandeliers, the swirling gowns, the polite chatter, all fading into insignificance. In the privacy of their movement, they exchanged glances laden with memory, longing, and the delicate ache of restrained passion. Her head tilted slightly, catching the faintest scent of his cologne, a mixture of cedarwood and the faint warmth of evening fires. 2 years, she whispered, more to herself than to him. 2 years, and yet the weight of yesterday lingers. He pressed a gentle, protective hand at the small of her back, guiding her with care. "And yet, Lady Isabella, 2 years have taught me that no amount of pride or propriety can diminish what is real," he replied, his voice a low murmur that brushed against her ear. In that moment, the dance was not merely a societal expectation, but a conduit of confession, a silent admission that the past cruelty could be confronted and perhaps redeemed. Every step, every subtle motion, was a wordless negotiation of trust, desire, and hope. The night drew on, the orchestra's final notes lingering like a soft echo, and Isabella withdrew slightly, bowing with the poise that had defined her since childhood. "The evening wanes, Your Grace," she said, her voice calm yet soft, "and I must take my leave." The Duke inclined his head, though his eyes lingered, unwilling to relinquish the connection they had rediscovered. "Indeed, my lady, yet I hope this is not our final discourse," he replied, the unspoken promise hanging between them like the last star in a fading twilight sky. Isabella's lips curved in a subtle, almost imperceptible smile, a mixture of anticipation, challenge, and cautious hope. As she departed into the misty streets of London, her carriage awaiting, Isabella's heart thrummed with an emotion both exhilarating and terrifying. The Duke had shown her the man she had glimpsed in London long ago, capable of contrition, capable of desire, capable of love, tempered by reflection and strengthened by time. And for him, seeing her grace, her strength, and the quiet radiance of her presence, the realization that he had lost nothing but time hit with a profound force. The stage was set for a reckoning not of words alone, but of hearts, hearts that had endured separation, misunderstanding, and societal expectation, yet now beat once more in quiet, tentative harmony. The London ballroom shimmered beneath the glow of 1,000 crystal chandeliers, their light fracturing into tiny stars that danced across polished floors and gilded moldings. Guests moved with a careful grace, laughter and conversation flowing like a gentle river, each smile and curtsy a study in refinement and concealed intent. Lady Isabella Morton entered quietly, her sapphire gown whispering against the marble as she glided through the throng. Eyes turned, whispers rippled in her wake. But Isabella held her head high, the years of exile and self-reclamation reflected in her composed yet radiant demeanor. She had endured humiliation, built a life of quiet purpose, and emerged with a dignity that commanded attention without a word. The Duke of Ashbourne, observing from the far end of the room, felt the familiar constriction of both desire and apprehension. His gaze lingered upon her, as though time itself had bent to highlight her presence. The memory of the morning when his family had humiliated her surged with painful clarity, followed immediately by the longing that had never ebbed. He knew that tonight demanded courage beyond polite conversation or fleeting glances. He had to act, not for society, not for propriety, but for the undeniable truth of his heart. As the orchestra swelled, he crossed the room, each step measured yet brimming with quiet urgency, drawing the attention of onlookers while remaining tethered to a single, immutable goal. Isabella sensed his approach before he spoke, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a pull she could not resist. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the delicate anticipation of what was to come. He reached her side, bowing with a refined grace that acknowledged both their shared history and the gravity of the moment. "Lady Isabella," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the subtle hum of conversation, "I must speak, for silence no longer serves either of us." She met his gaze, steady and discerning, aware of the weight his words promised, yet willing to listen, for the first time truly open to the possibility of reconciliation and love. "I have wronged you," he continued, his tone calm yet infused with the tremor of earnest emotion. "I allowed my pride, my duty to family, to blind me to the truth of what I desired and the heart I should have protected. No longer shall I stand idle, nor permit the judgments of others to dictate what belongs solely to us." Isabella's lips parted slightly, a breath caught between caution and hope. The ballroom seemed to recede, leaving them in a bubble of unspoken confessions, the orchestral notes now a gentle accompaniment to the dialogue of hearts. Every onlooker, every whispered comment, faded beneath the gravity of their reunion. She spoke then, her voice measured yet vibrant, carrying both reproach and recognition. "Your words are not the only remedy for the years of silence and scorn," she said, "yet they are a beginning. I have endured, cultivated patience, and guarded my dignity. If you truly seek my trust, it must be earned, not claimed by mere apology, however sincere." The Duke inclined his head, acknowledging both the depth of her strength and the challenge that lay before him. "Then I shall prove it, in every gesture, every choice, until you may know with certainty that my devotion is unwavering." He extended a gloved hand, and she accepted it, a simple yet profound act that symbolized a bridge across the chasm of past wrongs. Together, they moved to the center of the room, where the orchestra's final notes heralded a slow, deliberate dance. Each movement was a conversation, every glance a confession, every brush of their hands a reaffirmation of connection. Isabella's head rested lightly against his shoulder, not in submission, but in partnership, as they navigated the steps with a grace born of both societal training and the deeper rhythm of hearts reunited. The onlookers, sensing the gravity of the moment, murmured in awe, though none could fully comprehend the private storm that had preceded this visible serenity. As the dance concluded, the Duke drew her close beneath the soft glow of a crystal chandelier, their foreheads nearly touching, eyes locked in a silent dialogue of longing and reconciliation. "Isabella," he whispered, a tremor of vulnerability breaking through the veneer of control. "I have lost time that I can never reclaim, yet I shall devote the remainder of my life to honor, cherish, and protect you. Will you allow me this chance?" Her lips curved in a faint, contemplative smile, a mixture of anticipation and trust, as she placed her hand upon his chest, feeling the steady beat of a heart that mirrored her own. "Yes," she breathed, her voice soft but resolute. "For the heart that is steadfast may yet be forgiven." A subtle shift occurred in the room, then, a quiet acknowledgement of their union, though not proclaimed in scandal or overt defiance. Guests observed the exchange with polite admiration, sensing a story unfolding that transcended gossip and social expectation. The Duke's family, once instruments of humiliation, now found themselves confronted by the undeniable power of grace, resilience, and authentic love. The tension that had once dictated every glance and word now dissolved into a measured respect. Isabella's dignity remained intact, unassailable, and radiant. The union that had begun under shame now flourished in quiet triumph, a testament to patience, courage, and the enduring force of genuine affection. They retreated to a more private corner of the ballroom, where the light fell softly upon their intertwined hands. There, words were whispered, laughter shared, and glances exchanged that carried centuries of longing and promise. Isabella recounted her years of quiet service, her efforts to cultivate a life of purpose beyond societal judgment, while the Duke spoke of his sleepless nights, his reflections on pride and duty, and the depths of emotion he had long suppressed. Each revelation deepened the bond between them, transforming vulnerability into intimacy and regret into a shared resolve to move forward together. As the evening drew to a close, Isabella and the Duke stepped onto the balcony, the night air cool against their cheeks, the city lights of London twinkling below like a constellation within reach. The distance between them vanished in that quiet moment. No longer were they defined by past humiliation, societal scorn, or unspoken doubts. They were simply two hearts, reunited, strong in dignity and love. He drew her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle, reverent kiss upon the back of her fingers, a gesture both private and monumental. "Together," he murmured, "we shall write our own story, one that honors both your courage and the depth of my devotion." Isabella's eyes glimmered with unshed tears, a mixture of joy, relief, and the quiet thrill of love finally claimed. The carriage waited to return her to her residence, yet the night seemed endless, filled with the soft promise of mornings yet to come. Within the quiet of London's streets, away from judgment and expectation, they walked side by side, unhurried, their hands clasped, hearts aligned. The orchestra's final echoes, the soft murmur of the crowd, the flicker of gas lamps, all became a backdrop to a love story that had survived shame, distance, and the rigid strictures of society. Isabella's dignity, once threatened, now radiated in harmony with the Duke's unwavering admiration, and in that delicate equilibrium, they discovered a love that was both triumphant and enduring. As the first hints of dawn began to chase away the night's shadows, the Duke and Isabella paused beneath a solitary oak, the branches stretching like protective arms above them. "No longer shall we be divided by pride or expectation," he whispered. "Our hearts, tested and tempered, shall guide us henceforth." Isabella, resting her head lightly against his shoulder, felt the truth of his words resonate within her. In that quiet, stolen moment, love had conquered shame, patience had triumphed over scorn, and two souls, once torn apart by circumstance, now moved forward together, bound by understanding, respect, and an unbreakable devotion.